In the grey morning fog of Oregon, Ethan discovered a tiny bobcat lying motionless in the mud. He thought it was gone until the kitten's eyelid quivered and blinked once. That fragile spark of life drew him into an unexpected journey through fear, hope, and the quiet love that can exist between man and the wild. The fog hung low over the pines as dawn slipped quietly into the valley, turning mountain edge into a muted watercolor of grey and pale gold. Ethan Cole walked the gravel road along the tree line, boots soft on wet earth, Finn pacing at his side, their breath pale in the chill. These early rounds were his truce with the past, a slow breath before the town woke. Finn slowed first. The shepherd mix lifted his nose, shoulders tightening as if the air had snagged on something unseen. Ethan almost kept going, adrift in the hush, until Finn let out a short, uncertain whine. It wasn't alarm yet, more like a question, and his dark eyes fixed on the brush below the shallow dip. At first, Ethan saw only wet leaves, drowned grass, pale stones veiled in fog. Then a sound slid through the stillness, a ragged, fraying cry, thin as breath on cracked glass. He stilled, heart leaning toward it. The sound came again, weaker, from the runoff where cold water whispered over rock and tangled roots. He slid down the ditch, fingers clawing slick roots as Finn scrambled close behind, nails scraping mud. The smell of iron water and crushed greenery rose up, damp on his hands, clinging to his sleeves. For a heartbeat, he feared it was just his mind replaying old nights. Then he parted the branches, and the forest answered. A tiny shape lay sprawled in the muck, fur plastered dark against skin, ribs too sharp beneath faint ghost spots. It was a bobcat kitten, no bigger than his hand, ears oversized and limp, one paw twisted beneath its chest as if it had fallen mid-step and never finished the motion. Wild, Ethan thought. Too wild, too small, too late. He crouched low, careful not to snap a twig, as if sound itself might bruise what little dignity remained. Finn hovered close, breath warm on his neck, tail held stiff in an uneasy line. The kitten did not stir. No twitch of whisker. no rise of its narrow chest. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath with him. Ethan reached out, knuckles brushing along its side. The fur was shockingly cold, like river stone from deep shadow, wrung against his skin and training. His throat tightened. Somewhere beyond the pines, a mother might be searching or might already be lying, just as still, both of them folded into the same indifferent silence. He told himself to step back, to let the wild decide, as it always had. But the weight of that tiny form hooked into an old, unhealed place. He remembered another animal, another promise, broken in a sterile room of bright light. He slid his hands beneath the kitten, lifting it clear of the mud as gently as regret. The head lolled, jaw parted just enough to show a thin pink tongue, whiskers clumped with grit, eyes sealed to the dim morning. Finn gave a soft, doubtful whine, as if to ask whether they had already lost. Ethan almost whispered an apology to the kitten, its unseen mother, the forest for crossing a line he couldn't see. Then, cradled closer to his chest, something faint stirred against his palms. Not warmth exactly, but not nothing. A fragile resistance. Ethan froze. Every breath held mid-air. The world narrowed to damp fur, fragile bones, and the steady drum in his ears. "Come on, little one," he murmured. "If there's anything left, take it." For a stretched, weightless second, only the trees replied, creaking softly above the ditch. Then one tiny eyelid shivered, hesitated, and lifted a fraction. A dull golden fleck showed beneath, like an ember buried deep in ash. The gaze did not fully find him, but it moved one slow, deliberate blink cutting through the fog. Ethan exhaled, the sound half disbelief, half fragile relief that hurt his chest. Behind him, Finn's tail thumped once against stone, as if claiming the moment for them both. The fog no longer felt like a shroud, but a curtain edged open. The kitten's head sagged again, yet that single blink burned like a quiet demand, cradling the wild scrap of life tight against his jacket. Ethan climbed out of the ditch, boots slipping on the slick slope. Finn pressed close at his heel, glancing up as if to keep him moving. The clinic wasn't far heaped. Towels, steady hands waited there. Or so he needed to believe. His stride grew sharper, surer. Behind them, the ditch filled again with quiet water and pale light, erasing the hollow where the kitten had lain unseen. Ahead, between the dark pines and the waking town, something delicate shifted course, a thin, uncertain thread tying a lonely man, a loyal dog, and a fragile, blinking bobcat kitten into the same new story. The old clinic sat at the edge of town like it had been forgotten there. Paint sun faded. Porch boards creaking under Ethan's boots as he shouldered the door open. Warm air drifted out to meet the thin, cold weight of the kitten in his arms. Finn slipped in first, circling back as if counting every breath that crossed the threshold. Inside, morning light slid through dusty blinds, striping the worn exam table and metal trays. Ethan laid the bobcat kitten on a folded towel, its fur still matted with mud and grit, tiny sides barely lifting. Against the white, it looked even smaller, like something the wild had almost taken back without anyone knowing. He moved by habit now, space heater pulled closer. Another towel warmed, stethoscope pressed near the fragile chest. The sound he found was faint, stuttering, like a drum played from the far end of a tunnel. "You're late to the party, kid," he murmured, voice steadying his own hands more than the kitten's heart. Finn hopped up to rest his paws on the table edge, nose twitching. The dog's gaze flicked between Ethan and the kitten, pupils dark with an animal calculation of its own. There was no growl, no jealousy, only a wary kind of curiosity, as if he recognized that whatever this was, it mattered to the man he followed. The kitten's whiskers trembled when Ethan dabbed its face clean, revealing faint spots along its cheeks, the ghost of the pattern it was supposed to grow into. A paw twitched, claws peeking out, more reflex than threat. Its ears, still too big for its head, folded and unfolded with slow, uncertain effort. When he tried the warmed formula, a droplet hung at the tip of the syringe before touching the kitten's lip. For a moment, nothing. Then the tongue flicked weakly, catching the taste. It wasn't much, just a swallow that might have been accidental. But Ethan felt something unclench in his chest at the tiny act of choosing. Outside, trucks started up on Main Street, a distant reminder that other lives had simpler mornings. In here, time gathered around the table. The heater hummed. Finn's breathing steadied, and the kitten lay half-curled, suspended between giving in and digging in. One eye slit, not fully shut, like it was listening. Ethan draped another layer of towel over its back, careful not to pin it down. He'd seen wild animals fight harder than this, and he'd seen them let go faster. This one seemed caught in between, stubborn in a quiet, unfamiliar way, as if the forest hadn't finished writing whatever story it had started in that ditch. Finn, unable to restrain himself any longer, leaned in closer. His nose brushed the kitten's side once, soft as a question. The bobcat's body flinched. A small, startled shiver that rippled from shoulders to tail. A muted sound pushed out of its throat, more rasp than hiss. But it was the first real answer it had given. Ethan's hand hovered, ready to separate them. But he stopped. The kitten's eye cracked open again. A sliver of cloudy gold catching the light. It didn't focus long. Still, for a breath, it landed somewhere between Finn's muzzle and Ethan's face, as if measuring this strange, warm world it had fallen into. That moment passed on a shaky exhale. The kitten sagged, but not in the empty way from before. Its head found the fold of towel by its own slight effort. Tiny claws flexed once, snagging loose threads. It was claiming something, however feebly spaced. Warmth. One more chance pulled out of nowhere. Ethan cleared the tray beside him, lining up what he might need and what he hoped he wouldn't. Fluids. Gauze. A soft collar he prayed not to use. His movements were calm, but in the quiet there was a careful reverence, like he was standing inside a chapel built for things too wild and small for anyone to promise. The bobcat's breathing found a fragile rhythm, still shallow but less scattered. Finn settled on the floor by the table, chin on his paws, eyes never leaving the bundle of fur above. In that warm, sunlit room, The three of them held their separate silences, loosely stitched together by one blinking thread of life. As the sun climbed higher and painted the clinic in a gentler gold, the kitten shifted closer into the hollow of the towel, its body no longer stiff, only tired. The crisis hadn't passed. Not really, but the raw edge of it eased. For now, the wild heart stayed. For now, that was enough. By late afternoon, the storm had passed the town by, leaving only high, pale clouds and a thin wash of light over the clinic windows. Inside, the Bobcat Kitten slept and stirred in uneven cycles on the towel, caught between exhaustion and a stubborn, wordless instinct that refused to release its grip on this borrowed warmth, as if arguing with the dark itself. Hours folded into a slow ritual of breath checks and careful feeds. Ethan warmed formula in his palms, offered drops at the corner of the tiny mouth, waited longer than any chart would advise. Sometimes the kitten swallowed. Sometimes it turned away, as if offended that survival now depended on someone else. Every small refusal felt strangely deliberate. It came fully awake for the first time when Finn's collar jangled too close. In a heartbeat, the kitten's back arched, fur lifting in a ragged ridge, a sound ripping loose that was too raw and wild for its size. Finn froze mid-step, ears flattening, startled by the fury inside something so fragile, as if a pine cone had roared at him in protest, daring him. Ethan stepped between them, hand raised more in respect than reprimand. The kitten's hiss broke into a rasping breath, sides pumping, paws spread wide like it couldn't decide whether to lunge, leap, or simply collapse again. Those cloudy gold eyes locked on Finn, silently mapping the outline of this new threat, memorizing him for later nights to come. To the kitten, the room was wrong. No cool dirt, no cover of fern, no heartbeat of the forest humming underneath. It smelled of metal and soap, old coffee, dog, man, and sun baked too long into tired walls. Everything felt exposed and edged. Instinct whispered that only its claws still belonged to it, and even those felt unsteady, unfamiliar, borrowed. That evening, Ethan called Nora, phone wedged to his shoulder as he watched the small body pace in anxious circles. She listened without interrupting, then said gently, "If it's strong enough to hiss at your dog, it's strong enough to live. Just remember, Ethan, it's a bobcat, not a house cat needing rescue. Don't promise what you can't keep this time." Her words landed on an old bruise he rarely touched. There had been a grey tabby once, a loyal shadow in exam rooms, and a surgery that went sideways in a rush of alarms and too bright light. That empty carrier in the back closet still waited like an accusation, making him wary of fragile attachments, of hope that walked on four paws again at all. Maybe that was why the kitten's defiance hooked into him so cleanly. When he reached toward it again, it struck, claws whispering over his skin, deliberate enough not to break. A warning, not a wound. Ethan didn't yank back. He let his hand rest there, steady, letting the wild little heart read his stillness and find no violence waiting there in him. Finn stretched out on the floor by the table, chin on his paws, observing like a quiet sentry exiled to the borderland. Each time the kitten bristled, Finn's ears twitched, but he did not rise, respecting a line he didn't understand. Some fragile truce settled, predator and protector, each holding their ground, both pulled into the same orbit of hope. Later, as a light rain returned to murmur against the roof, the kitten tested its legs. It wobbled toward the table's edge, blinking hard, gaze darting to the open room, the closed door, the high window where dusk pooled violet blue like deep water. Ethan's hand slid into place, a human railing offered without force, a barrier made only of patience and air. The kitten pressed its nose to his fingers once, tasting salt, soap, and the steady, unhurried patience there. For a breath, its ears eased and shoulders loosened as if some deep wire slackened. Then memory kicked. It jerked away with a muted growl, ashamed of that tiny, dangerous softness, as if caught leaning toward a trap it knew by scent and blood. Ethan didn't chase what slipped away. He lowered the overhead lights, leaving only a warm lamp casting a quiet circle around the table. He spoke now and then, simple, drifting words about Main Street going soft at night, about Finn's thunder fears, about how some losses still woke him before dawn, though he never said exactly which ghosts they were. The bobcat listened despite itself, one ear tilted toward the sound, eyes narrowed to careful slits. Curled atop the towel, it watched man and dog with the same razor focus it once saved for owls and coyotes in the dark outside. It did not trust these walls or these hands, but it also, unmistakably, chose not to die, holding its thin line till morning. By the third day, the clouds over Mountain Edge stacked low and heavy, turning the sky the colour of old tin. Inside the clinic, the world felt smaller and safer. The hum of the heater, the rustle of towels, Finn's quiet sighs. The bobcat kitten stood for longer now, thin legs trembling, yellowed gaze tracing every edge of its borrowed den. It had begun to explore in tight, suspicious circles, testing the limits of table, crate, and Ethan's reach. Each step was a negotiation between weakness and pride. When his hand came too close, the kitten swatted not wild panic anymore, but measured warning, as if reminding him this fragile body still belonged to the hills, not his gentle plans. Rain started just after noon, first as a whisper on the roof, then a steady drum that blurred the town into muted grey beyond the windows. Ethan watched the storm build on the radar, frown deepening. A call came in from a rancher up the road, a deer tangled in fallen wire near the ridge. Bleeding. Panicked. No one else on duty. No one else coming. He glanced at the kitten, now curled in the crate he'd left open, sides rising with a stubborn rhythm. Finn stood beside him, reading his hesitation like a language. "I won't be long," Ethan murmured, half to the animal, half to the ghosts in the walls. He latched the crate door with careful fingers, testing it twice before grabbing his coat. Lightning split the early dark as he and Finn pushed into the rain, wind clawing at his hood. The clinic's porchlight flickered behind them, shrinking with every step. In the back room, the bobcat lifted its head, ears pricking at the sudden emptiness. The heater hummed. The storm's low growl seeped through the floorboards like a warning. Thunder rolled closer, shaking dust from the rafters. The kitten rose, unsteady but driven by some instinct older than walls. It paced the crate, eyes narrow, tail lashing once. The latch rattled with each touch of its paws. Fear tangled with the restless pool of wet earth and dark trees and a mother's scent it could no longer find. A hard gust slammed rain against the glass, and the power flickered, then steadied again. In that stuttering moment, the kitten lunged. The latch, never meant for claws that precise, slipped half free. One more shove, and the crate door popped open with a hollow click that vanished under the thunder's next long, rolling breath. When Ethan returned hours later, soaked to the bone and mud streaked to his knees, his shoulders sagged with the weight of another life patched together on a stormy hill. Finn bolted ahead, shaking rain from his coat as they stepped inside. The clinic felt colder than it should have. There was an absence waiting for him. The crate door hung open, swinging slightly. Towels were clawed, dragged, scattered like pale leaves. For a second, Ethan simply stared, mind refusing to stitch the pieces together. Then a dark smear along the floor flashed in his vision, a thin arc of blood, small but sharp against the worn linoleum leading toward the back door. Finn's nose found the trail first, nostrils flaring as he let out a low, troubled whine. Ethan followed, pulse pounding louder than the lingering storm. The back door wasn't wide open, only warped enough at the bottom for desperation to squeeze through. A tuft of sandy fur snagged on a splintered edge told him everything he had tried not to imagine. He stepped out into the wet night with a flashlight, calling into the trees, voice torn by wind. Easy. Little one, hey, come on back. No answer came but rain on leaves and the distant crack of branches shedding their burdens. Finn ranged ahead, working the thin scent until it simply thinned out and died in the running water. By the time they circled back, Ethan's clothes clung cold and heavy, shoes filled with grit. He paused under the porch light, staring at the narrow gap in the doorframe, at the faint, drying red. He'd offered warmth, safety, a different ending. The wild had taken back its own, or tried to, on its own harsh terms. Inside, the clinic felt larger and hollow. Every empty towel a reminder. Finn lay by the open crate, restless, ears flicking at sounds that weren't there. Ethan sat beside him, rain ticking on the roof. Storm finally starting to drift east. "I thought we were past this," he whispered, not sure if he meant the kitten or the habit of believing too late. Morning came soft and pale, as if the storm had wrung all the colour from the sky and left only a thin wash of light over the ridge. Ethan stepped out with a thermos in one hand and Finn at his heel, moving slower than habit. The air smelled rinsed and cool, the kind of clean that usually promised fresh starts. Today, it only felt like after. The forest at the edge of Mountain Edge looked unchanged, but he knew better now. He walked the narrow trail toward the ditch where they'd first found the kitten, boots sinking into damp soil. Finn trotted ahead, nose low, tail carried in a straight, working line, searching for a scent that had once meant fragile hope. At the old runoff, the water ran clearer, tugging dead leaves along its shallow path. Ethan crouched where the mud bore faint, smudged tracks too washed out to read, blurred by the night's heavy rain. He traced one with a fingertip anyway, as if touching it might call the small body back into being, whole and stubborn again. Finn picked up something and followed it, threading between ferns and slick stones. Ethan watched his dog pause, circle, then tilt his head toward the deeper trees. There was confusion in that posture, not certainty. The trail was there, but broken bobcat, fear, wet bark, then nothing but cold, running water swallowing the rest. "Easy," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. He set down a shallow dish near the ditch, pouring out formula and setting a folded towel beside it. The same worn fabric that had once held a shivering heartbeat. It looked wrong out here, too bright against the earth, like a promise left on the wrong doorstep. He stayed a while, longer than he meant to, listening. A jay called once. A branch creaked. The forest carried on with its indifferent chores. No small cry answered back. No brush rattled with the weight of a returning kitten. Hope, stretched too thin, began to feel less like faith and more like refusing to read what was written. Nora's truck pulled in by midday, her boots crunching the gravel as she joined him by the tree line. She listened as he described the open crate, the blood, the gap in the door. Her mouth tightened, but she kept her words gentle. She was wild from the start, Nora said. Sometimes they go, and that's the kindest version we get. He nodded, though the agreement caught in his throat. It was one thing to know the rules of wildness, and another to send a face, a single blink, back into that harsh arithmetic. The bobcat had wanted out. It had chosen teeth and trees over warm hands and humming machines. Maybe that was all the answer he deserved. They walked the lower slope together, Finn ranging ahead, weaving through wet brush with disciplined loops. Once, he barked short and sharp, drawing Ethan's heart up into his chest. But it was only a scattering of rabbit tracks and the sharp tang of pine. The dog's tail lowered. He moved on without conviction. By late afternoon, the towel by the ditch remained untouched, save for a stray beetle dragging itself across the fabric. Ethan collected the empty dish and left the cloth where it lay. A marker or an apology, he couldn't tell which. If you're out here, he murmured to the trees, you know where the door is. I won't lock it again. Back at the clinic, he fixed the warped frame, sealing the gap with new screws. Hands steady but slow. Finn watched from the hallway, head tilted, as if still listening for the faint scrape of small claws on tile. The crate stayed open this time, towel fresh, a hollow space that waited without demanding to be filled. As evening settled over Mountain Edge, a thin breeze slid down from the ridge, carrying the cool scent of wet rock and fur. Finn padded to the back step and looked out toward the dark line of trees. On some impulse that felt older than training, he gave 3 low barks into the fading light patient, calling, not quite ready to give up. The sound drifted into the timberline and dissolved there, met by nothing but the sigh of branches. Ethan stood behind him, one hand resting between Finn's shoulders. The ache in his chest had edges now, sharp but bearable. Somewhere out there, the wild had made its choice. Inside, he told himself, he had to learn how to live with it. Twilight slipped over mountain edge in slow layers, softening the hard lines of the day into something quieter. The clinic glowed a faint amber behind its dusty windows, the kind of light that made passing drivers think of soup and old magazines. Inside, Ethan finished charting, pretending not to look at the empty crate in the corner. Finn lay by the back door, ears tuned to a world beyond glass and wood. Every so often, he lifted his head, listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. The gap in the frame was fixed now, sealed tight. No cracks for cold or chance to creep through. It should have felt safer. Instead, the room held an odd, restless waiting. Outside, the ridge darkened to a single charcoal line against a fading sky. The storm-washed air carried the smell of wet bark and stone, that familiar scent of the wild that had once ridden in on a shivering bundle of fur. Ethan rinsed a metal bowl without needing it, letting the warm water run longer than it should. The knock, when it came, was so soft he almost missed it. Not knuckles on wood, but a dull, uneven thump against the bottom of the back door. Finn bolted upright, nails skittering. A low sound caught between a whine and a warning. Ethan froze, dish still in his hand, heart tripping into that same old, dangerous hope. He crossed the room in 3 long steps and opened the door halfway, expecting wind. A stray branch. Nothing. Instead, the porch light fell on a small, soaked shape collapsed against the threshold. Mud clung to its fur, turning its faint spots into smudges. One side of its neck was matted darker, the shine of fresh blood hidden in the shadows. It was the Bobcat Kitten, thinner than before, but not empty. Its paws were scraped raw, tiny claws dulled by stone and bark. For a moment it didn't move at all, just lay there breathing in short, frayed pulls. Finn stood stiff beside Ethan, tail low, reading both danger and something that felt like recognition. Ethan knelt slowly, hand hovering above that fragile back. The kitten's ears twitched first. Then one eye cracked open, clouded gold catching the porch light. It stared up at him through mud and pain and storm, as if checking that it had come to the right door. Then, with visible effort, it blinked once slow, deliberate, impossibly clear. The motion landed in his chest like a spoken word, not the wild panic from the crate, not the dazed flutter in the ditch, but a choice. Ethan's throat tightened. "You stubborn thing," he whispered. You walked back. His fingers brushed its shoulder. This time, the kitten didn't strike. It only shivered and tried, weakly, to tuck its paws beneath itself. Inside, the clinic seemed to draw nearer, warm air spilling toward the open door. Finn stepped forward, nose lowering until it almost touched the kitten's flank. A tiny hoarse sound rose from the bobcat, more breath than growl, but it didn't pull away. The three of them hovered there on the line between in and out, wild and held. Ethan slid his arms under the kitten, surprised again at how little it weighed and how heavy it felt. It sagged into the cradle of his hands, trusting nothing and yet not resisting. As he carried it back to the table, Finn followed close, each step careful, as if they all understood that something fragile had been loaned to them twice now. Under the softer light, the damage showed itself, a bite at the neck, shallow but angry, bruising along one hind leg, burrs twisted into fur. Signs of something out there that had decided this little body was prey or rival and nearly finished what the storm had started. Nearly, but not completely. Not for lack of fight. He cleaned the wound with slow, steady hands, talking about nothing important, the way he did with skittish horses and scared children. The kitten flinched but didn't lash out. Its gaze followed his movements, then sidestepped to Finn, who settled on the floor, anchoring the room with quiet breath and unblinking watchfulness. By the time a fresh towel was laid and a gentle bandage wrapped, the bobcat's breathing had found a fragile rhythm again. It curled in on itself, this time by choice, tail tip resting against its nose. One eye stayed half open, tracking the vague outline of man and dog as if to be sure they stayed where it left them. Ethan dimmed the overheads until only a warm pool of light held the table. The worst of the storm season was behind them now. The ridge outside, slick and dark but calm. He stood a moment longer, studying that small, wild shape. Whatever had driven it back, hunger, injury, memory had carried it straight to his door. As the evening deepened into quiet, the bobcat shifted once, just enough to face the room. Its gaze passed over Finn, then up to Ethan, slow and unhurried. It did not blink this time in fear or fading. It blinked like an acknowledgement, then let its eyes close fully, as if, for tonight at least, it had decided not to run. Morning eased into the clinic without drama, spilling a soft, pale light across the worn floorboards and the table where the bobcat lay. The bandage at her neck was clean. Swelling had eased. She woke slowly, sorting dream from memory, then stayed where she was instead of searching for an edge or escape, as if testing whether this safety would hold. She had learned the shape of this room in the hours between pain and sleep, the square of the window, the hum of the heater, Finn's nails on tile. Nothing here moved like a predator. The man spoke low, his scent the same. Still, the wild in her weighed every sound before letting her rest. Safety, she decided, was only a pause between tests, never a promise she would accept blindly. Ethan moved with a quiet efficiency that had softened at the edges. He refreshed her water, warmed formula, and later slivers of meat, letting her decide when to reach. When he came too near, she showed teeth, not blind panic now, but a clear warning. He met it with space, a language she understood. In that careful distance, something steadier formed, respect that did not demand gratitude or trust. Finn settled into a new role without being asked. He camped near her table, far enough to be safe, close enough to be chosen. When she shifted, his head lifted. When she slept, his eyes never fully closed. Their gazes met often her gold, his brown-like guards sharing a quiet, uncertain border. Neither advanced, neither fled. Whatever would grow there would rise from patience, not force. On the third day, Ethan opened the crate again, this time leaving its door wide. No latch, no trick, A folded towel waited inside, smelling of sun, soap, and the faint echo of her own fur. The bobcat studied it, ears flicking, tail a tense question mark. After a long, wary pause, she stepped in alone and turned once, choosing the hollow herself. That simple act loosened something in the room. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Shoulders dropping. Finn's tail tapped once against the floorboards like a small approval. No one clapped. No soft music swelled. But the moment felt louder than most rescues. The wild had not surrendered, only agreed to heal here. For now, days blurred into a new rhythm measured in small, stubborn victories. Ethan built a run off the back door, wrapped in high wire and shaded with cedar planks. Inside, he scattered branches, flat rocks, and an old stump to own. When he opened the way, the bobcat stepped into the late light, tasting open air again without bolting for the tree line. In that pen, she moved differently, shoulders rolling, tail alive. The walls were higher than his hands, but lower than the horizon she remembered. She tested each corner, claws ticking on wood, nose lifting to wind that carried honest mountain scents. Finn watched through the mesh, fascinated as she climbed and crouched, power returning in quiet layers. Sometimes, from the doorway, Ethan watched her track drifting shadows like ghosts only she could see. His guilt thinned with each sure-footed landing and easy leap. She was no longer scrap or victim now, but wildness loosely stitched here. Proof that rescue did not always have to mean possession. That understanding settled over him like softened light. The emotional crest came without thunder. One evening, as the sky went amber and the ridge burned gold, Finn lay just outside the wire, and the bobcat came to rest on the inside, flank almost mirroring his. No growl, no warning, only parallel stillness. Trust did not arrive as a touch. It appeared as a shared, unguarded breath between them. He did not name her, resisting the reflex to pin letters on something the mountain might reclaim. On paper, she stayed Bobcat, but when he spoke, his words bent into she and little one. Those small shifts threaded through his days, easing a weight he'd been carrying longer than he liked to admit. It felt less like owning, more like witnessing. As her strength returned, her eyes sharpened. She began to test him differently, darting close to steal meat from his fingers, vanishing into shadows, then appearing above him on a beam, watching. Each game said, "I see you. I remember." He answered by honoring her rules, not trying to blunt her edges. In accepting that, he felt his oldest self-judgment loosen. The chapter settled into a gentle, restless peace. That night, the bobcat curled in the far corner of the run, where she could see the black line of trees beyond and the yellow square of clinic light behind. Between those two worlds, she held her own thin middle ground. Ethan left the inner door unlatched, honoring both her freedom and her choice for now. Summer settled over Mountain Edge in soft layers, warm light pooling in the gravel outside the clinic and along the boards of the back porch. The cedars whispered lazily instead of bracing against storms. In the run behind the building, the bobcat moved with an ease that no longer looked breakable, her paws silent on wood, her muscles drawing clean lines through the fading day. She had grown into her self-ears, sharp, coat full, spots carved in clear bronze and smoke. The limp that once tugged at her hind leg had thinned to a memory. When she climbed the stump to watch the trees, her body belonged to the distance beyond the wire. Only her pauses gave her away, those long, measuring looks back at the open door and the man who worked inside it. Ethan felt the shift before he admitted it. What had arrived as a handful of shivering bone now crossed the run like a held note. Too wild for the small box he'd built, and too aware to forget him entirely. Some evenings, as Finn dozed beside his chair, Ethan watched her pace the fence line, tracing the seam between borrowed safety and the life waiting past it. He widened the enclosure when the first cool breeze of late August slid in, adding higher beams, fresh limbs, more shadows to stalk. She used them all, grateful but restless. At the far corner, where the fence nearly kissed the tree line, she began to linger, nose lifted, reading the news the mountain carried on its wind, tail-writing thoughts he could not translate. The peak of it came on a clear morning when the sky rang impossible blue. Ethan stepped out with her meal and found her already at that corner, pressed close to the wire, body long and still. A fresh scatter of prints marked the dirt outside. Larger bobcat track, steady, unhurried, crossing past in the dark hours while they'd slept inside. She had scented kin. He knelt by the fence, following the path with his eyes, feeling something inside him answer even as it tightened. She turned her head, golden gaze flicking from the trail to his face, reading the truth there. No one spoke it aloud, not man, not cat, but the choice had arrived. Keeping her now would mean turning rescue into a cage. That afternoon, he left the inner gate open and unlatched the outer hatch for the first time, swinging it toward the tree line until it waited like a quiet invitation. Finn sat a few paces back, restless, ears seesawing between loyalty and the cool of rustling leaves. The world beyond was bright and bare. No promises written anywhere. The bobcat watched the gap, muscles coiled but not panicked. She stepped forward, then back, glancing once toward the clinic door, where Ethan stood with his hands empty. He did not call her name, he had never given her one. He only said, softly, "If you go, go strong." Words meant more for himself than for the wild heart listening. She slipped through on the next breath, not with a desperate bolt, but with a measured, claiming stride. Sun lit the curve of her spine as she touched open earth, nostrils flaring at pine and stone, and the faint, fading trail of the other cat. At the edge of shadow, she paused, half turned, her body an echo of the night she had crawled to his door. For a long second, their worlds overlapped. Clinic and timber, man and creature held in the same band of light. Then she looked back at him, eyes clear and unclouded now. No fever, no fear. Her gaze caught his like it had on that porch. And once again, slowly, she blinked one deliberate, unhurried closure of her eyes, as if stitching a thread between them and cutting it clean. This time he did not chase the space that opened. Finn whined once, but even he stayed where Ethan stood. They watched her melt into the underbrush, each step quieter until she was only a suggestion between ferns. Then a memory slipping up toward the ridge. The forest accepted her without ceremony, the way it always had meant to. Evening found Ethan on the back step, Finn leaning against his leg, the rung gate still open to the trees. The absence hummed, but it wasn't the hollowed-out ache he'd known before. It felt full somehow, like a circle closed properly. The crate inside, the repaired door, the old guilt in his chest, all of it seemed smaller in the dimming light. Weeks later, on a cold, bright morning edged with frost, Finn stiffened at the yard's edge. A shape stood just beyond the tree line, a bobcat. Older, stronger, haloed by thin sun on her whiskers. She did not come close. She didn't need to. She held their gaze across the brittle grass, blinked once in that same silent language, then turned back to the hills. And this time, Ethan's heart didn't break. It bowed, grateful that he had thought she was gone until she blinked once, and taught him what it really meant to let something live. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.